It's a great honor for me to introduce my colleague, Frances Fox Piven, who is a distinguished professor at the Graduate Center.
Business has always been powerful in the United States when social movements have been dormant. And it's the fear of the movements of the late 19th century that accounted for the progressive legislation of the early 20th century. Well, the movement subsided. When the movement subsided, business got back into form to do politics the way it usually did politics. And as that unfolded, what happened? We got the giddy, crazy, reckless 1920s, which produced the crash of 1929. Business overreach, business greed, business heedlessness about the future produced the crash. And after the crash, the movements reemerged. Protest movements start out small. Nobody can read the future. They start out with an action here and an action there. The first big labor action in the 1930s was the strike against Toledo's Autolite plant. Nobody knew that it would be followed by the great Teamster strikes in Minneapolis, the longshoremen strikes in San Francisco, the rubber worker strikes in Akron, the sit-down strikes in particular in Flint, Michigan. In the late 1950s, in 1960, 61, 62, nobody knew that a crowd about this size of people riding freedom buses into Mississippi would be the beginning of the great Black freedom movement, which finally ended apartheid in the South. But when that movement, when the civil rights movement subsided, it was then that business mobilized in an effort to take back the great achievements, really, of the 20th century. Government protection for unionism, Social Security, welfare, help for the poor, housing programs, and even voting rights. But they can be stopped because they've been stopped before, and they've been stopped by protest movements. They've been stopped by people taking over factories. They've been stopped by people taking over schools. They've been stopped by people blocking highways. That's what protest movements do. So I congratulate you for being here. And you ought to know. You ought to see how important what you're doing is. Because you may be the pioneers of the movement that changes American history for the better.
Thank you for being here, Professor Piven. I was wondering if you would comment on the emergence of these rolling revolutions from Tahrir Square to Santa Magua, to the Greeks, to the Spain, where young people, not necessarily under one platform, just calling for human dignity and economic respect, seem to be taking over. Do you think these movements have a chance, since they're decentralized and don't actually have a unified message at their start?
Well, yeah, I think they have to be decentralized. That both the conditions influencing the movements and their opportunities for action are different in each setting. They have to, I think our movement has to be decentralized too for the same reason, because we want a movement that includes poor people, that includes students, that includes workers. It's going to have to be decentralized. That's okay. Great movements are decentralized, making it possible for people to act in different contexts, sometimes around some issues that are cast in different ways. I think all of these were democracy movements, however. But the conditions they face are so different. The Egyptian movement faced the military, which stood behind Mubarak, And it's the interaction between that movement and the military that's going to determine the outcome of the movement. And I don't know enough about the situation to make any predictions. Libya is entirely different. The Greek movement, this is the movement against the European banks, central banks, and the IMF. This is a movement that, in a way, is very scary because the stakes are so large. They are taking on European finance. They could bring it down. They could win something. We'll see.
How else can we make sure that in Wisconsin this thing keeps reverberating, inspiring people, letting us know
by
that
doing
we can grow?
this. By doing more of this. Action begets action. People have to be shown that there are others out there who disagree, who are angry, and who are willing to move. And you know, at the beginning, it'll seem as though there are too few. But these things accumulate. They reverberate. And only 15 years later, somebody says it was a great movement, but it was really a movement that was disparate, began small, people doing something here, there, and accumulating.